We're up to the 10th principle of the faith, 10th description of reality, and I'm going to combine some here because with this 10th principle, we start the last of the three components every religion must have. When we started, I explained that every religion has to describe the supernatural being that the religion addresses, and also the religion has to identify the communication from that supernatural being, because if there's no communication, there's no relation, there's nothing to be done, we don't know what to do. And thirdly, there has to be consequences to following that communication or not. So we're up to the consequences. But I don't think it quite fits that model. What the Rambam says in number 10 is that God knows the actions of man. He says the actions, not the thoughts. And he quotes three verses to support this contention. One is from Jeremiah 32:19, which says, "Great of counsel and mighty of works, as your eyes are open upon all the ways of the people." So that's talking about God. And then he quotes a verse in Genesis 6:5, which is talking about just before the flood, and the Lord saw that the evil of man was mighty upon the earth, so he decided to destroy them. And then later in Genesis 18:2, Sodom and Gomorrah, who got destroyed as well, so it tells he saw the yelling of Sodom and Gomorrah as it was mighty, was no good. But all these things, all these three instances are talking about on a macro level, global level of observation, and it's the actions of the people. And so what this says to me is that God is keeping aware of which way the world is going and will intervene in case it's going down the tubes, as he did in each case. Like with Sodom and Gomorrah, he destroyed them because they were a very bad example to everybody. And before the flood, and the whole thing was going wrong, and he wanted to start over with Noah. So God intervenes to make sure that the purpose of his creation, which was to have created beings create properly and grow in stature, grow in creative force, and accomplish something on their own, will transpire, will come about. And if they start heading on the wrong road, he'll intervene and make sure they don't go that way. But this is not talking about the thoughts of man, in other words, the essence of humanity. That's the next principle. The next principle says that God will reward the one who does the commandments, who follows the instructions of the Torah, and punish the ones who don't. Now the reward is that you enter the world to come, the world that's not yet to be, which will be different than this world. And if you didn't follow the instructions, then you'll be erased. You just won't continue. And that's the worst punishment, because that's the end of you. But otherwise, there's a continuity. There's a continuation of your life. So what's the difference between 10 and 11? My answer is that 10 is macro, that God is looking here at the actions. Will the entire project work? And when it starts to go off on a deep end in a wrong direction, that will self-destruct it, so then he intervenes and gets it back on track. Whereas the 11th principle is that every single individual is monitored and rewarded or chastised according to what they've accomplished in their life. So this is a necessary distinction, because let's say something starts to go wrong, but it's not my fault. It's just like I was born into this society, and I was trained to be an evil person. I didn't know any better. So then God will intervene and get it going again. So that's globally, that you're not being held to account. It's just the program will be redirected so that it works out. But as far as your particular circumstances, well, God he's very creative. He loves to create. He loves to create different forms. So just like he's created so many different forms of life, he's created so many different forms of human life, so many different personalities, so many different circumstances, so many different talents and skills and interests and capabilities. Like we had Moshe, who was capable of seeing the clearest vision of a God, and we have, infants that aren't capable of much of anything, but even when they grow up, we have, people very limited resources. but they make choices. They're still alive. They're still human. So you have to understand that God is judging based on your potential, based on your circumstances. So you could really, from everybody else's perspective, be quite evil. But what you accomplished because you were born into an evil society, you were born with terrible parents, you were born with terrible desires that you couldn't fight. The other people didn't have to fight these desires. They were raging within you. And you overcame them once, twice. Fantastic. So that could be your big reward. We can't judge people. Individuals are not for us to judge because we don't know the total of their circumstances and the type of life that God expected them to achieve. That's what these two things introduce, is that on one hand, there is standards, like society has to develop at certain lines because that's going to enhance everybody, but individually everybody has to be judged on their own particular circumstances and merits. I'm not giving excuses for people that choose wrong things. We have another idea that God doesn't present you with a challenge you can't overcome, but many of us do fail to overcome those challenges. So we have to live with that, and maybe we have to be challenged quite a few times before we overcome it, and that's part of the game too. There's a macro level of God's recording and intervening in His creation, and then there's a micro level where He's dealing individually with extreme precision. That makes sense when you can realize that there's both levels of supervision and care going on.